The crowd erupted in gasps as the tourist stepped forward, his face calm but his eyes burning with determination. The royal guard, dressed in gleaming armor, stood rigidly at attention, unaware of the chaos about to unfold. The tourist reached into his bag, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a swift motion, he released a bulldog. The bulldog was no ordinary animal. Its fur shimmered faintly under the sunlight, and its eyes glowed with an unnatural intelligence. It lunged at the royal guard, not to attack, but to do something far more extraordinary. The guard's high-tech weapon, a symbol of the city's advanced technology, suddenly sparked and fizzled out. The bulldog let out a low growl, and the weapon disintegrated into dust. The crowd fell silent, their eyes wide with shock. Cameras flashed, capturing every moment of the bizarre incident. The tourist raised his hands in surrender, a small smile playing on his lips. "It's for your own good," he said softly, just before the royal guards tackled him to the ground. But the bulldog was gone. It vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a faint trail of smoke and 1,000 unanswered questions. The video of the incident spread like wildfire across the globe. News anchors struggled to explain what had happened. Was it a terrorist attack? A prank gone wrong? Or something far more sinister? The tourist was taken into custody, his identity shrouded in mystery. He refused to speak, except to repeat one cryptic phrase: "The bulldog knows the truth." Authorities dismissed him as a madman, but deep down, they couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the sun set over the futuristic city, strange things began to happen. Streetlights flickered, drones fell from the sky, and the city's advanced AI systems started behaving erratically. People whispered in fear, wondering if the tourist's actions were just the beginning of something much bigger. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, the bulldog watched and waited. The interrogation room was cold and sterile, its walls lined with advanced surveillance equipment. The tourist sat calmly in the chair, his hands cuffed, but his demeanor unshaken. Across the table, a stern-faced officer glared at him, demanding answers. "Who are you?" the officer barked. "Why did you release that animal? What's your goal?" The tourist leaned back, his eyes distant, as if recalling a memory from long ago. "I'm no one special," he said quietly. "Just a man who's seen too much." The officer slammed his fist on the table. "Don't play games with me. That bulldog disabled a royal guard's weapon. How is that possible? What kind of technology are you using?" The tourist smiled faintly. "Technology? No, you don't understand. That bulldog isn't just technology. It's something else. Something beyond what you can imagine." The officer leaned in closer, his voice low and threatening. "Explain. Now." The tourist sighed, knowing he had no choice but to reveal part of the truth. "Years ago, I was part of a secret government project. We were tasked with creating advanced AI to protect humanity from future threats. But the project was shut down abruptly. The government claimed it was too dangerous, but I knew the real reason. They were afraid of what we had discovered." "And what was that?" the officer asked, his curiosity piqued despite himself. The tourist's expression grew serious. "We discovered that our world is not what it seems. There are forces at play, ancient, powerful forces, that could destroy everything if left unchecked. The bulldog was designed to counteract those forces. It's not just a machine. It's a guardian." The officer scoffed. "A guardian? You expect me to believe that?" Before the tourist could respond, the lights in the room flickered. The surveillance screens went black, and a low hum filled the air. The officer jumped to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. "What's going on?" The tourist remained calm. "It's already begun," he said. "The bulldog is doing its job. But it can't do it alone." Outside, the city was in chaos. Streetlights flickered on and off, drones crashed into buildings, and the once reliable AI systems that controlled everything from traffic to security began to malfunction. People panicked, unsure of what was happening. Some blamed the tourist, while others whispered about a larger, more sinister force at work. In a hidden lab deep beneath the city, a group of scientists monitored the situation with growing concern. They had been working in secret, trying to understand the ancient artifact that powered the city's technology. The artifact, a relic from an alien civilization, had been dormant for centuries. But now, it was awakening. One of the scientists, a young woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression, turned to her colleagues. "We need to find that Bulldog," she said. "If what the tourist said is true, it's our only hope." Meanwhile, the Bulldog reappeared in the city, its glowing eyes scanning the chaos around it. It moved with purpose, as if following an invisible trail. People stared in awe and fear, unsure whether to approach it or run away. The Bulldog ignored them, focused on its mission. Back in the interrogation room, the tourist looked at the officer with a sense of urgency. "You need to let me go," he said. "If you don't, this city, this world, will be destroyed. The Bulldog can't do this alone. It needs me." The officer hesitated, torn between his duty and the growing sense that the tourist might be telling the truth. Before he could make a decision, the door burst open, and a group of armed guards rushed in. "We have orders to transfer the prisoner," one of them said. The tourist's eyes narrowed. "Who gave the orders?" The guard hesitated for a moment before answering. "The royal family." The tourist's heart sank. He knew what that meant. The royal family had always been the guardians of the artifact, but they had also been its greatest enablers. If they were involved, things were far worse than he had feared. As the guards led him away, the tourist whispered to himself, "Hurry, my friend. We're running out of time." The Bulldog moved through the city like a shadow, its glowing eyes scanning the chaos around it. People stopped and stared, some in awe, others in fear. A child reached out to touch it, but the Bulldog darted away, disappearing into an alley. It wasn't running from the child, it was following a signal, a faint pulse that only it could detect. In the heart of the city, the royal palace stood tall and imposing, its walls adorned with symbols of power and tradition. Inside, the royal family watched the unfolding chaos on large holographic screens. The king, an elderly man with a stern face, turned to his advisors. "Find that Bulldog," he commanded. "It's the key to everything." Unbeknownst to them, the Bulldog was already inside the palace. It had slipped past the high-tech security systems as if they didn't exist. Its movements were precise, almost calculated, as it made its way to the palace's underground vault. The vault was heavily guarded, but the Bulldog didn't need to fight its way in. It simply walked up to the guards, and they froze, their weapons falling from their hands. Inside the vault, the Bulldog found what it was looking for, a massive, glowing artifact embedded in the wall. The artifact pulsed with energy, its light casting eerie shadows across the room. The Bulldog approached it cautiously, its eyes narrowing as if in concentration. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the artifact began to hum, its light growing brighter. Outside, the city's chaos intensified. The malfunctioning AI systems began to reboot, but not in a way anyone expected. Drones that had crashed into buildings suddenly sprang back to life, their lights flickering ominously. Street lights dimmed, and the air grew heavy with an unnatural silence. People huddled together, their fear palpable. In the interrogation room, the tourist felt a sudden shift in the air. He knew what it meant. "It's too late," he whispered. "The artifact is awake." The officer, now visibly shaken, grabbed the tourist by the collar. "What are you talking about? What's happening?" The tourist met his gaze, his eyes filled with urgency. "The artifact is not just a source of power. It's alive. And it's been waiting for this moment." Meanwhile, the Bulldog stood before the artifact, its body glowing in sync with the pulsating light. It let out a low growl, and the artifact responded, its hum growing louder. The Bulldog's eyes flashed, and for a brief moment, it seemed to communicate with the artifact. Then, the light from the artifact dimmed, and the Bulldog turned away, its mission far from over. Back in the city, the chaos began to subside, but the damage was done. People emerged from their homes, their faces etched with fear and confusion. The royal family, realizing the Bulldog had infiltrated the palace, issued a citywide alert. "The Bulldog is a threat," the announcement declared. "Do not approach it. Report any sightings immediately." But not everyone believed the royal family's warnings. A small group of rebels, led by the young scientist from the hidden lab, saw the Bulldog as a symbol of hope. They had been monitoring its movements and were determined to find it before the royal guards did. "We need to help it," the scientist said to her team. "If what the tourist said is true, the Bulldog is our only chance to stop the artifact." As night fell, the Bulldog reappeared in the city, its glowing eyes cutting through the darkness. It moved with purpose, heading toward the outskirts where the rebels were waiting. The rebels watched in awe as the Bulldog approached, its presence both intimidating and comforting. One of the rebels, a burly man with a scar across his face, stepped forward. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. The Bulldog tilted its head, as if considering the question. Then, it let out a series of barks that sounded almost like words. The rebels exchanged puzzled glances, but the young scientist's eyes lit up with understanding. "It's trying to tell us something," she said. "It needs our help." The Bulldog turned and began to walk away, pausing to look back at the rebels. It was clear, they were meant to follow. The Bulldog led the rebels through the city's outskirts, its glowing eyes cutting through the night. The rebels followed cautiously, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. They didn't know where the Bulldog was taking them, but they trusted its instincts. Meanwhile, in the royal palace, the king convened an emergency meeting with his most trusted advisors. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with unease. "The artifact is unstable," the king said, his voice low and grave. "If we don't regain control soon, it will destroy everything we've built." One of the advisors, a tall man with sharp features, stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the Bulldog is the key. It's the only thing that can stabilize the artifact. We must capture it at all costs." The king nodded, his expression grim. "Send out the royal guards. No one is to interfere. And bring me the tourist. He knows more than he's letting on." Back in the city, the Bulldog stopped abruptly in front of an abandoned warehouse. The rebels exchanged puzzled glances, unsure of what to expect. The young scientist stepped forward, her eyes scanning the area. "This place, it's one of the old research facilities," she said. "The government shut it down years ago." The Bulldog barked once, then pushed open the warehouse door with surprising strength. Inside, the rebels found a hidden entrance leading underground. The air grew colder as they descended, their footsteps echoing in the narrow passageway. At the bottom, they discovered a secret lab filled with advanced technology and dusty equipment. The scientist's eyes widened as she recognized some of the machines. "This is where they worked on the artifact," she whispered. "But why would the Bulldog bring us here?" The Bulldog walked over to a large console and pressed its paw against a panel. The console lit up, and a holographic image of the artifact appeared, rotating slowly in midair. The rebels watched in awe as the Bulldog barked again, this time in a specific pattern. The hologram shifted, revealing a series of encrypted files. "It's trying to show us something," the scientist said, her fingers flying over the console as she decrypted the files. What she found left her speechless. The files contained detailed records of the royal family's experiments with the artifact. It wasn't just a source of power, it was a living entity, an ancient alien intelligence that had been dormant for centuries. The royal family had awakened it, using its energy to fuel the city's technological advancements. But in doing so, they had unleashed a force they couldn't control. This is unbelievable," the scientist said, her voice trembling. "The artifact is sentient. It's been manipulating the royal family, feeding on their greed and ambition. And now, it's growing stronger." The Bulldog let out a low growl, its eyes glowing brighter. It was clear, the artifact had to be stopped before it consumed the entire city. Back in the palace, the tourist was brought before the king. The king studied him with cold, calculating eyes. You know more about the artifact than anyone, he said. Tell me how to control it. The tourist shook his head. You can't control it. No one can. The artifact is alive, and it's using you. The only way to stop it is to destroy it. The king's expression darkened. Destroy it? Do you have any idea what that would mean for this city? We would lose everything. You've already lost, the tourist said quietly. The artifact doesn't care about your power or your legacy. It only cares about survival. And it will do whatever it takes to ensure its own existence. The king hesitated, his mind racing. For the first time, doubt crept into his thoughts. Was the tourist right? Had they made a terrible mistake? Outside, the city was eerily quiet. The malfunctioning AI systems had gone silent, but the air was thick with tension. People huddled in their homes, afraid of what might come next. The royal guards patrolled the streets, their orders clear: find the Bulldog and bring it to the palace. But the Bulldog was already on the move. It led the rebels out of the warehouse and back into the city, heading straight for the palace. The rebels followed, their determination growing with every step. They knew the stakes were high, but they also knew they couldn't do this alone. As they approached the palace, the Bulldog stopped and turned to the rebels. It barked once, its eyes filled with urgency. The scientist nodded, understanding what it wanted. We need to get inside, she said. The artifact is in the palace vault. If we can reach it, we might have a chance to stop this. The rebels exchanged determined looks. They knew the risks, but they also knew they had no choice. The Bulldog had chosen them for a reason, and they weren't about to let it down. The Bulldog led the rebels through the dark streets, its glowing eyes cutting through the night like beacons. The city was eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity replaced by an unsettling silence. The rebels moved quickly but cautiously, aware that the royal guards were searching for them. As they approached the palace, the young scientist turned to the group. We need a plan, she whispered. We can't just walk in there. The guards will be on high alert. The Bulldog let out a soft growl and trotted toward a hidden side entrance. The rebels followed, their hearts pounding. The entrance was small and partially concealed by overgrown vines, but it was unguarded. The Bulldog pushed the door open with its nose, and the rebels slipped inside. The palace was a maze of corridors and chambers, but the Bulldog seemed to know exactly where to go. It moved with purpose, its ears twitching at every sound. The rebels stayed close, their footsteps barely audible on the polished floors. Suddenly, they heard voices. A group of royal guards was approaching, their weapons at the ready. The rebels pressed themselves against the wall, holding their breath. The Bulldog crouched low, its eyes glowing faintly. As the guards passed by, the Bulldog let out a low, almost imperceptible hum. The guards froze for a moment, their movements sluggish, as if they were in a trance. Then, they continued on their way, unaware of the rebels' presence. The scientist stared at the Bulldog in awe. It's manipulating their perception, she whispered. It's like it's hacking their minds. The Bulldog glanced at her, its eyes filled with a strange intelligence. Then, it turned and continued down the corridor. The rebels followed, their confidence growing. Deep within the palace, the tourist sat in a dimly lit cell, his mind racing. He knew the Bulldog was close, he could feel it. But he also knew time was running out. The artifact was growing stronger, and if it wasn't stopped soon, it would be too late. The door to his cell creaked open, and the king stepped inside. His face was pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and anger. Tell me how to control the artifact, he demanded. I know you know. The tourist shook his head. I've already told you. You can't control it. The only way to stop it is to destroy it. The king clenched his fists. And what happens to the city if we do that? Our technology, our power, it all comes from the artifact. Without it, we're nothing. Without it, you're free, the tourist said quietly. Free from its influence. Free to build something better. The king hesitated, his resolve wavering. For a moment, it seemed like he might listen. But then, his expression hardened. No. I won't let you destroy everything we've built. Guards. 2 guards entered the cell and grabbed the tourist, dragging him to his feet. The king turned away, his voice cold. Take him to the vault. If he won't help us, he'll be the first to face the artifact's wrath. Meanwhile, the Bulldog and the rebels reached the palace vault. The door was heavily guarded, but the Bulldog didn't hesitate. It stepped into the open, its eyes glowing brightly. The guards raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the Bulldog let out a powerful bark. A shockwave of energy rippled through the air, knocking the guards off their feet. The rebels rushed forward, their hearts pounding. The scientist quickly accessed the vault's control panel, her fingers flying over the keys. I can't open it, she said, her voice tense. It's locked with a biometric seal. Only the king or his closest advisors can. Before she could finish, the Bulldog pressed its paw against the panel. The door hissed open, revealing the glowing artifact within. The rebels stared in awe, their breath catching in their throats. The artifact pulsed with energy, its light casting eerie shadows across the room. The Bulldog stepped inside, its eyes fixed on the artifact. It let out a low growl, and the artifact responded, its hum growing louder. The rebels followed, their determination unwavering. But as they approached the artifact, the door behind them slammed shut. The king stood in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. You think you can stop me? He snarled. You think you can take away everything I've worked for? The tourist, held by 2 guards, struggled to break free. Don't do this, he pleaded. The artifact will destroy us all if you don't let it go. The king ignored him, his eyes fixed on the Bulldog. Destroy it, he ordered the guards. Now. The guards raised their weapons, but before they could fire, the Bulldog let out a deafening roar. The artifact's light flared, and a wave of energy surged through the room. The guards were thrown back, their weapons clattering to the ground. The king stumbled, his face pale with fear. What is this? The Bulldog turned to him, its eyes filled with a mixture of pity and resolve. Then, it stepped toward the artifact, its body glowing brighter with every step. The rebels watched in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. They knew the Bulldog's mission was far from over, and that the hardest part was yet to come. The vault was filled with an otherworldly glow as the artifact pulsed with increasing intensity. The air crackled with energy, and the rebels could feel the weight of the artifact's power pressing down on them. The Bulldog stood before the artifact, its body radiating a soft, golden light. It turned to the rebels, its eyes filled with a mixture of determination and sorrow. The young scientist stepped forward, her voice trembling. What are you going to do? She asked, though deep down, she already knew the answer. The Bulldog let out a soft whine, its gaze shifting to the tourist, who was still held by the guards. The tourist's eyes filled with tears as he understood. No, he whispered. There has to be another way. The Bulldog shook its head slowly, its expression almost human in its sadness. It turned back to the artifact and let out a series of barks, each one resonating with the artifact's hum. The light from the artifact began to dim, but the Bulldog's glow grew brighter. The king, still recovering from the shockwave, stumbled to his feet. What is it doing? He demanded, his voice filled with panic. The tourist struggled against the guards, his voice breaking. It's sacrificing itself to destroy the artifact. Don't you see? It's the only way to save us all. The king's face paled as the realization hit him. No, it can't. The artifact is everything. Without it, we're nothing. The Bulldog ignored him, its focus entirely on the artifact. It stepped closer, its body beginning to merge with the pulsating light. The rebels watched in stunned silence, their hearts breaking as they realized what was happening. The young scientist fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. Please, there has to be another way. The Bulldog turned to her one last time, its eyes filled with warmth and reassurance. Then, with a final, resolute bark, it stepped fully into the artifact's light. The room was filled with a blinding flash, and for a moment, everything went silent. When the light faded, the artifact was gone. The vault was dark and empty, save for the faint golden glow that lingered in the air. The bulldog was nowhere to be seen. The rebels stood in stunned silence, their grief palpable. The tourist sank to his knees, his shoulders shaking with sobs. "It's gone," he whispered. "It's really gone." The king stared at the empty space where the artifact had been, his face a mask of disbelief. "What have I done?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. The young scientist wiped her tears and turned to the rebels. "We need to honor its sacrifice," she said, her voice steady despite her grief. "The bulldog gave everything to save us. We can't let that be in vain." The rebels nodded, their determination renewed. They knew the road ahead would be difficult, but they also knew they had to carry on, for the bulldog, for the city, and for the future. As they left the vault, the faint golden glow followed them, a silent reminder of the bulldog's bravery and sacrifice. The city outside was quiet, the chaos replaced by an eerie calm. People began to emerge from their homes, their faces filled with confusion and relief. The tourist stood at the palace gates, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "It's over," he said softly. "But its legacy will live on." The city awoke to a strange new reality. The once bustling streets, filled with the hum of advanced technology, were now eerily quiet. The artifact's destruction had left a void, but it was a void filled with hope. People stepped out of their homes, their faces reflecting a mix of relief and uncertainty. For the first time in decades, they were free from the artifact's influence, but they were also faced with the daunting task of rebuilding their lives. In the palace, the king sat alone in his throne room, his head bowed in shame. The weight of his mistakes pressed heavily on him. He had been so consumed by power and ambition that he had failed to see the truth. Now, with the artifact gone, he was forced to confront the consequences of his actions. The tourist, no longer a prisoner, stood by the palace gates, gazing out at the city. His heart ached for the bulldog, but he also felt a sense of peace. The bulldog's sacrifice had not been in vain. The city was safe, and the people had a chance to start anew. The young scientist approached him, her eyes still red from crying. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice soft. The tourist sighed. "Now, we rebuild. We create a city that doesn't rely on ancient artifacts or unchecked power. A city that values humanity over technology." She nodded, her determination shining through her grief. "We'll need help. The people are scared, but they're also hopeful. If we can show them a better way, they'll follow." The tourist smiled faintly. "You're right. And you're the perfect person to lead them." She looked at him in surprise. "Me? But I'm just a scientist." "You're more than that," he said. "You understand the balance between technology and humanity. You've seen what happens when that balance is lost. The people will trust you." As they spoke, the rebels gathered in the city square, their presence a symbol of hope. The young scientist joined them, addressing the crowd that had begun to form. "The artifact is gone," she announced, her voice carrying across the square. "But so is the bulldog, the guardian that saved us all. We owe it to its memory to build a better future, a future where we don't rely on dangerous power, but on each other." The crowd murmured in agreement, their faces filled with determination. For the first time in years, they felt a sense of unity and purpose. Meanwhile, the tourist made his way to the outskirts of the city, where the bulldog had first led the rebels. He knelt by a small patch of earth, his hands trembling as he placed a simple stone marker. "You were more than a machine," he whispered. "You were a friend. A hero. And I'll never forget you." As he stood, he noticed a faint golden glow in the air, like a whisper of the bulldog's presence. It was a small comfort, but it was enough to remind him that the bulldog's legacy would live on. Back in the city, the rebuilding process began. The young scientist and the rebels worked tirelessly, dismantling the old systems and creating new ones based on transparency and cooperation. The royal family, humbled by their mistakes, pledged to support the effort, though their role was now greatly diminished. The city's transformation was slow but steady. People began to trust one another again, and the sense of community that had been lost was slowly restored. The young scientist became a symbol of hope, her leadership guiding the city toward a brighter future. But even as the city healed, the memory of the Bulldog remained. Stories of its bravery spread, becoming legends that inspired generations. Children played in the streets, pretending to be the heroic Bulldog, while adults spoke of its sacrifice with reverence. The tourist, now an old man, often visited the stone marker he had placed. He would sit there for hours, reflecting on the past and the lessons he had learned. "You taught us so much," he would say, his voice filled with gratitude. "And we'll never forget you." Years had passed since the Bulldog's sacrifice, and the city was almost unrecognizable. The towering skyscrapers and advanced technology were still there, but they no longer dominated the landscape. Instead, the city had become a harmonious blend of nature and innovation. Parks and gardens flourished where cold, metallic structures once stood, and the streets buzzed with life and laughter. The young scientist, now a respected leader, stood on a balcony overlooking the city square. She watched as children played near a statue of the Bulldog, its golden eyes gleaming in the sunlight. The statue had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder of the sacrifice that had saved them all. Behind her, the tourist, now an elderly man with a kind face and a walking stick, approached. "It's amazing, isn't it?" he said, his voice filled with pride. "What they've built here, it's everything we hoped for." She turned to him with a smile. "It's more than that. It's proof that we can change, that we can learn from our mistakes and create something better." He nodded, his eyes misty with emotion. The Bulldog would be proud. The city's transformation hadn't been easy. In the early days, there had been resistance and fear. Some people had struggled to let go of the old ways, while others had doubted their ability to rebuild. But with time, patience, and the tireless efforts of the young scientist and her team, the city had found its footing. The royal family, now stripped of their power, had become advocates for the new system. The king, once consumed by ambition, had dedicated his remaining years to helping the city heal. He often visited schools, sharing the story of the Bulldog and the lessons he had learned. "Power," he would say, "is not about control. It's about responsibility." In the city square, a festival was underway. It was an annual event to celebrate the Bulldog's sacrifice and the city's rebirth. People from all walks of life gathered to share food, music, and stories. The atmosphere was filled with joy and gratitude. The young scientist stepped onto a stage in the center of the square, her presence commanding attention. "Today, we celebrate not just the past, but the future," she began, her voice strong and clear. "We celebrate the courage of those who stood up for what was right, and the legacy of the Bulldog, who showed us the true meaning of sacrifice." The crowd cheered, their voices echoing through the square. She continued, "But our work is not done. We must continue to protect what we've built, to ensure that no one forgets the lessons we've learned. Together, we can create a world where technology serves humanity, not the other way around." As she spoke, a small child approached the stage, holding a handmade drawing of the Bulldog. The scientist knelt down, her eyes softening. "What's your name?" she asked. "I'm named after the Bulldog," the child said proudly. "My parents told me its story. They said it was a hero." The scientist smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "It was," she said. "And so are you. Because you're part of the future it saved." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers filling the air. The tourist watched from the sidelines, his heart full. He had spent years traveling the world, sharing the story of the Bulldog and the city's transformation. But now, as he looked around at the thriving community, he knew his journey was complete. Later that evening, as the festival continued, the tourist made his way to the stone marker he had placed years ago. The golden glow that had once lingered in the air was gone, but the memory of the Bulldog remained as strong as ever. He knelt down, placing a small bouquet of flowers by the marker. "You did it," he whispered. "You gave them a chance. And they've made the most of it." As he stood, he noticed a small, golden light flickering in the distance. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He smiled, feeling a sense of peace. The Bulldog's legacy would live on, not just in the city, but in the hearts of everyone it had touched. The city had flourished, becoming a beacon of hope and progress for the rest of the world. The story of the Bulldog and its sacrifice had spread far and wide, inspiring countless communities to rethink their relationship with technology and power. The annual festival in the city square had grown into a global event, celebrated by people from all corners of the earth. The young scientist, now older and wiser, stood at the center of the square, addressing a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. "Today, we honor not just the past, but the future," she began, her voice steady and full of warmth. "We honor the courage of those who stood up for what was right, and the legacy of the Bulldog, who showed us the true meaning of sacrifice." The crowd listened in rapt attention, their faces filled with gratitude and hope. She continued, "But the greatest lesson we've learned is this: technology is a tool, not a master. It can build cities, connect people, and solve problems, but it is our humanity, our compassion, our courage, and our willingness to sacrifice for one another that gives it meaning." As she spoke, a hush fell over the crowd. Her words resonated deeply, reminding everyone of the journey they had taken and the challenges they had overcome. "The Bulldog's sacrifice was not just about saving a city," she said. "It was about showing us what we're capable of when we come together, when we put aside our differences and work toward a common goal." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the square. The scientist stepped down from the stage, her heart full. She had dedicated her life to building a better future, and now, as she looked around at the thriving community, she knew her work had been worth it. Meanwhile, the tourist, now an old man with a gentle smile, sat on a bench near the Bulldog statue. He watched as children played nearby, their laughter filling the air. One of them, a little girl with bright eyes, ran up to him. "Are you the man who knew the Bulldog?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. He chuckled softly. "Yes, I am." "Can you tell me the story?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. He patted the bench beside him, and she sat down, listening intently as he began to speak. "A long time ago, there was a city that had lost its way. It was filled with incredible technology, but the people had forgotten what truly mattered. Then, one day, a bulldog came along, a brave, selfless guardian who showed them the power of sacrifice and the importance of humanity." As he told the story, more children gathered around, their faces filled with wonder. He spoke of the bulldog's courage, the city's transformation, and the lessons they had all learned. When he finished, the children sat in silence, their hearts touched by the tale. "What happened to the bulldog?" one of them asked. The tourist smiled, his eyes misty with emotion. "The bulldog became a part of the city, a part of all of us. Its legacy lives on in everything we do, in every act of kindness, every moment of courage, and every effort to make the world a better place." The children nodded, their young minds filled with inspiration. They ran off to play, their laughter echoing through the square. The tourist watched them go, feeling a deep sense of peace. He had spent his life sharing the bulldog story, and now, as he looked around at the thriving city, he knew his journey was complete. Later that evening, as the sun set over the city, the tourist made his way to the stone marker he had placed years ago. The golden glow that had once lingered in the air was gone, but the memory of the bulldog remained as strong as ever. He knelt down, placing a small bouquet of flowers by the marker. "You did it," he whispered. "You gave them a chance. And they've made the most of it." As he stood, he noticed a small, golden light flickering in the distance. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He smiled, feeling a sense of peace. The bulldog's legacy would live on, not just in the city, but in the hearts of everyone it had touched. The story of the bulldog had become more than just a tale of sacrifice, it was a reminder of the power of hope, the importance of humanity, and the enduring impact of selfless acts. And as the city continued to thrive, its people carried that lesson with them, ensuring that the Bulldog's legacy would never be forgotten.